السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. You know, human beings work quite hard in their lifetime, and through the building part of their life, they are too busy taking care of their needs, the needs of their families, taking care of the essentials. And they do a lot of things to achieve what they want, what they set out to achieve. They earn degrees, they establish businesses, they work hard, they work 2 shifts, 3 shifts, and they do the impossible to try to provide honest living and comfortable living for themselves, for their loved ones. Obviously, in places and environments like the United States where things are comfortable and calm enough and stable enough for them to do so. And that in itself is a blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because increasingly there are so many pockets in the world, unfortunately overwhelmingly Muslim, where people don't even have the stability to even worry about beyond their daily survival, and they live in situations that doesn't even allow them that luxury. But when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows you the luxury not only to be able to strive and thrive, and make that living and be able to provide for yourself and family, when He gives you that, at some point you look at things around you and you realize that I've been working very hard, I've achieved most what I wanted, and in fact now I'm entering a stage of my life where I have to think of what happens after I move on. What happens that there's death, there's meeting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there's how, will I make sure that what I worked very, very hard to earn is going to be used even after I go in a proper manner. How in many cases people may start thinking at a time where they still have young ones under their care. Sometimes they reach a point where they're thinking about their grandchildren, the extended family. Also, there are those among us who, along the way, as they earn living and make wealth and build wealth and create wealth, they also get involved in a variety of causes, good causes. Some of them religious, some of them may not be even religious, maybe environmental, maybe other good causes out there. And also they start thinking about, well, I care about whatever the cause is. I care about feeding the needy, I care about helping the orphans, I care about building masajids, I care about, whatever it is that they care about. They start thinking, well, if I die, what happens as far as supporting those causes that I care about? And alhamdulillah, Islamically as a religion, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam instructed us to be very keenly aware of that, and did not leave us without direction in that regard. And alhamdulillah, we have guidance in that regard. Of course, we live in a world where that guidance also can and should take legal forms and means, so it can stand challenges, it can stand the possibility of someone who wants to defeat our purpose when we try to leave a legacy behind us that would help and support the people and the causes that we care about. And so we here at ISNA have made sure that we take care of educating our community in this regard, making sure that the hard work that one puts into their lifetime is at the end utilized in the best manner. And the best way to go about educating people perhaps is to put together the panel of those experts and individuals that have studied, and that it is are experts and have studied, and it is life profession in part to provide such education, as well as provide the support for people who wish to formally put their wishes on papers. And so today we have with us 3 distinguished attorneys. All our panelists are attorneys, and I will introduce them one by one, inshallah ta'ala, as they come up to speak. The first of them is going to speak about wills in general, and we know how important wills, they are so important that the Prophet ﷺ has a hadith that is very direct, very on point, that I don't believe he has mentioned about anything else in that importance other than salah perhaps, and that is, he said that it is not befitting for a Muslim to spend 2 nights in a row without having a written will. It is not befitting for a Muslim. Think about that. So we have an attorney, an expert who will talk to us about putting together a will that would hopefully be able to stand the basically, first it will conform with Islamic principles and your wishes as the person who is wanting to do the will, but as well as it will be one that can stand scrutiny in any of the legal forums in any of the states, of the 50 states of the United States. And so we start with that. Then we have, and that is Salman Azam, and I'll introduce him in a minute. Then we have Asad Ba-Yunus, also an attorney as I mentioned, who will talk to us about trusts, another vehicle, another way that I must say, and I'm sure he will shed some light on the history of it. Another instrument that I must say was pioneered within Muslim civilization and at one point was an instrument in establishing just about most of the civil society organizations that were established, from hospitals to schools to think tanks to other creations of that are beneficial to society at large, but also can be used for personal purposes and reasons to protect families, extended families, and make sure that they are provided for. So he will talk about trust, and then we will have Fatima Iqbal, also an attorney who will speak about charitable planning in general, meaning a will is great, a trust is terrific, but then you really ought to have a roadmap of a larger, more or less a strategic thinking of how am I going to leave a legacy, what are the best vehicles, and when to start, and what are the different ways I can go, etc., to give you that overall planning and understanding of how to plan charitable giving as a whole, not just be limited to having a will, though a will is important, not only to have a trust, though a trust is very important. So first we start with Salman Azam. My job the rest of the time, I spoke enough, is to stay out of the way of these experts so they can do their spiel. So the next I speak, I'm just going to be introducing Asad. The next I'll be just introducing Fatima. Otherwise I'm going to enjoy a glass of water there and just listen like you are to kind of educate myself as well. So first Salman. Salman is a managing partner at the law firm of Azam, Chandran and Gilani, LLP. He is the past president of the Indian American Bar Association. He's board of directors of the Downtown Islamic Center in Chicago. And I thank him for that because I give khutbah there and I know how that center day after day is becoming a really great place for a person to be downtown. He also is the ISNA Convention Media Chair, and he also serves on the ISNA Majlis Legal and Endowment Committees. Without further ado, Brother Salman.
Assalamualaikum. Thank you, Brother Safa Zarzur, who is probably an expert in this field as well. I know I've learned a lot from Brother Safa, who is an attorney as well and does a lot of, still has dedicated his entire career to like Muslim service organizations. But I want to thank all of you. I look out and I see a nice crowd with a lot of young people, which is nice because this is a topic that historically hasn't always been represented well with younger people. But as you know, none of us know when we are going to die. So we can't use the conventional wisdom of, I will deal with estate planning, I will deal with my will later in life, like, whoa, after I'm married, or after I'm older, or I have some kids, I'll deal with it then, or even a favorite that happens a lot. So we run a community law practice, and around Hajj every year, we have to have longer office hours, and there's like a long line out the door because people like to get their wasiyyah done before Hajj because this was the practice. Back in the day when Hajj was a very arduous journey and people did not know, oh, are we going to make it back from there? So they would go ahead and do their wasiyyah. And alhamdulillah, they still do this, and I commend them for doing this before they go to Hajj, but we now take a lot more journeys that are more arduous than Hajj sometimes, you know, more, we don't need to wait for Hajj, we don't need to wait for anything. And Safa quoted a very, very good hadith which shows you the importance of it. Do not go 2 nights of sleep when you have something worth bequesting. And sometimes people ask me what's worth bequesting, but I look around today, and today we have things in our possession that are worth bequesting. But most of you, if you're here attending ISNA convention, we all have something worth bequesting, and therefore it becomes incumbent upon us to not go those 2 nights, as the hadith says, without having our will or wasiyyah in place. It's also discussed in Surah Al-Baqarah. It is prescribed for you, when death approaches any one of you, if he leaves wealth, that he make a bequest to parents and next of kin, according to reasonable manners. This is a duty upon all the muttaqun, which is the pious. This is Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 180. Now, we talk about how it's a fard. It's actually a fard. And Asad and I were just talking about Kutiba alayku is the verse that comes before it. So it tells you, you've heard it when it comes to siyam, which is fasting, and we all know how important that is. But this precedes it by 2 ayahs and also starts the same way. So we're trying to show you the importance of this fard and having a will in place, because your wealth in your lifetime is an amana from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and after you pass on, you must distribute it according to His decree. And basically, I mean, we all live, most of us live in the United States of America. We're in Illinois here, and a lot of states have a way to distribute your wealth even if you don't have a will, right? They have a distribution schedule by state statute or law, and that is a way. And I'll talk about why that is not the best way, especially if you are Muslim. Because that's what people say, well, there's a system in place, or my wife gets a lot, why isn't that okay? And I'll tell you a little bit about that, right? Because I use a line when talking about making a will. Where there's a will, there's a way. We've all heard it. It's not talking about wills in the estate planning manner, it's talking about something else, but it works for here too. Because where there's a will, there's a way, and it is your way. And that's the only way, at least in the United States of America, to get Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's way. So if you want to distribute your estate in a Sharia compliant way through a wasiyyah, you have to have a wasiyyah in place, because without that, it'll surely be distributed in a way that is not in accordance with Sharia. Okay? So that is why, and Islam has a purpose for everything they decree. This is one of the many reasons why a wasiyyah or a will is decreed. Questions I get otherwise. Well, a lot of times I have a situation where, a lot of states give everything to my wife, she's my spouse, or my husband, and, I trust that they'll distribute it, and that should be fine. Why isn't that okay? And I try to bring up what I say is a doomsday scenario on this situation. Why can't a spouse get everything? And there's a situation that we came across once, and there was a husband and wife, and the husband or wife, they didn't have any wills. The husband passed away. They had 3 kids. The husband passed away, and he did not have a will, and everything went to his wife. A couple of years down the line, the wife remarried. Still has the 3 kids, and then she also never did her wasiyyah or will. Unfortunately for this family, a couple of years after that, the wife also passed away. Everything went to her husband, her new husband, which is the stepfather of these children. And at this point, I want you to understand what has happened. You would hope and pray that this stepfather would now take care of his children, but the father has seemingly disinherited his children, his 3 children, because he did not have a plan in place. Because of not having a wasiyyah in place and not giving his rightful heirs what they are due, he gave everything to the wife, and the wife gave it, gave it to her new husband, which is the stepfather. And in this process, they had disinherited their children. And nobody wants to do that. Nobody wants to be in a position where that is even a possibility. And that goes against us, because it is our job to take care of our children and our next of kin. And we can't let them become reliant on somebody else, because this is our job. So that's one very real reason, one very real factor of why we need to do a wasiyyah. Because we don't want to maybe disinherit some people that we care a lot about, or we don't want guardianship left to chance. We want to make sure who our children will be taken care of after we pass on. So also another reason is, I want, I have a special needs child, or I have one kid who is more in need of my wealth than another, and I remind them that, people hear, you know, my sons get a bigger share than my daughters, and I don't know how to deal with that here. Well, there's a lot of ways to deal with it if you do the proper planning, if you have a wasiyyah. You know, your lifetime gifts, they're not regulated by Azam. You can give in your life as you wish. Okay, you can set up, and Asad's going to talk about trust. You can set up a special needs trust. You can you can set up anything that you need in your life for kids that you think need a little bit more special attention. And even after you pass on, after the right, you have a third to give how you choose. Like, so outside of your heirs, you have a charity to give to, and this is important when we talk about it, right? Fatima will cover planned charitable giving, but we have, you know, massages that we have that are an institution for us. We've gone there, we've gotten help from there. We've got our kids like learn from them, and then, you know, we attend conventions at ISNA. We take part in like things that help us, and we want to leave some charitable giving for them. You can do so through a vehicle like this. Just because you said it or you made the intention and didn't do it, it's not going to happen otherwise, right? If somebody remembered it and then they try to do it afterwards, that is one way. But you know, we can't leave it up to chance. So if you want to give to charity or an organization that you really feel strongly about, whether it be like ISNA or your local masjid or a charity of your choice of a cause that you like a lot, the only way to do it is to prescribe it in your will or wasiyyah. So these are some very, very real reasons of why you absolutely need to deal with your wasiyyah. And then also thinking about our death is a good thing. You know, we get so consumed in life that we forget about planning for our death. So that's why I want to commend all of you for coming out to such a session which makes you help plan about your hereafter. That makes you, reminds you of the life after death. And, you know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you know, they tell us that you should also remind yourself of your death because you should go visit cemeteries, and that makes you remember about the hereafter and keeps us in check. In the same way, I think wasiyyah is a very important, it's a very important exercise to do when thinking about that. In Surah Nisa is the surah that actually talks about the actual distributions, and it goes into depth more about how your wealth should be distributed. In Surah 4:11, Surah Nisa, the distribution in all cases is after the payment of legacies he may have bequeathed or debts that may have come before. And that's just one of the many, but you know, some people ask, you know, where in the Quran is it? We talked about how it's prescribed to you in Surah Baqarah, but it also goes into great depth in Surah Nisa about the particulars of the situation. So, I mean, this is the overview that I wanted to kind of give. Our session is short today. I want to leave time for questions, which I think are good, but these are the reasons to do it. The only other thing I'll talk about before I hand it over to Asad is like, what do you need? People ask, like, how do I get a will? You know, if there's anything, like the least thing I do, I want people to be like, leave here thinking, well, I need a will in place, because if I don't have a will in place, I am very incomplete. You know, there's some really good brochures outside that you can get. You know, it gives you some really good, you know, preparation on what to look for, how to choose an attorney, you know, and but what do you need? You need to pick some very key things, you know. You need to get an attorney to draft a will for you. You need to pick an executor. That's really important. Somebody you trust to carry out your wishes as, you know, prescribed in your will. Preferably someone who doesn't have a conflict of interest, like so nobody who is obviously going to benefit from the will, who's not going to you know, be a beneficiary of your assets. That is someone that you can pick. Maybe someone like, you know, like a good friend or somebody in the community that you trust. But you have to pick a executor and a backup executor, because these are two really key people that you need to help, you know, get your will across. You know, otherwise, like, we always talk about some very famous situations like Elvis Presley. These are people who passed away without having a will. They had obviously sizable fortunes, but people then contested, you know, how it should be distributed. It was tied up in court, and so sometimes, you know, people are in need of funds to live, you know, after your death, or even to take care of things right after your death, and they cannot because it's tied up, you know, in probate, or somebody is challenging it. And the bad part about it is that, like in the case of Elvis Presley, it actually squandered a good amount of that estate because of the fact that it was not prescribed in a will or anything, and it was challenged, and it took up so long that it was tied up and it was depleted. And that's another way. Like, wouldn't we want to deal with it not only the way, because we have an option to do it the way that it was prescribed to us, but we can also maximize it. And that's where the 1/3 comes into effect. You know, what other way to get sadaqah jariyah that's going to help you for an eternity by giving, you know, by giving to charities of our choice that can help us after our death. There's very few things that help us after we die, right? Our good deeds will help us while we're alive, but by planning, we can also make arrangements to help or give to a charity that can give us sadaqah jariyah and help us in our afterlife to get to Jannah. So I think those are the basics that I wanted to cover for wills, inshallah. We want to answer a lot of questions. We always get a lot, so we want to give you some time, and I'll give it back up to Safa, inshallah. Jazakallah khairan.
Thank you, Salman. Indeed, in the case of legacy and charitable giving and wills and trusts, the questions are the most important. So we want to leave as much time as possible. So our presenters will limit themselves to 10-15 minutes, and then we'll open it up for questions. I do have evaluation forms for the session that perhaps, if you want, actually feel free to pick up one afterward to evaluate the session. And also, by the way, I didn't introduce myself. I'm Safa Zarzour, former Secretary General of ISNA, Vice Chairman of the Council of Islamic Organization, an attorney and an educator by profession. And I'm always honored to be part of the ISNA family and the ISNA Convention. Our next speaker is Asad Ba-Yunus. He's an attorney in upstate New York, specializing in Islamic estate planning, nonprofit, corporate law, and civil litigation. He's a member of the ISNA Majlis Shura. We sit together on Majlis Shura now, and serves as the chairman of the Legal Affairs Committee. And by the way, the three of us are members. He's the chairman. We are 2 members of it as well. Is this on still? How about now? Cool. So we all sit on the legal committee of ISNA, but he doesn't stop there. I mean, law and community is not enough for him, so he's a volunteer firefighter in his community. Go figure. Asad, without further ado.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على رسول الكريم محمد النبي الأمين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. Is it coming up? Looks like there's something coming up. I hope so. Oh, yeah. In the meantime, there. Okay, good. This, by the way, this presentation I put together on the PowerPoint, it was done last minute, so please forgive any typos. I was on the plane, it was kind of bouncy. But there was one thing actually that, one example of something that I wanted to cover about wills that someone didn't talk about, and it's about the flexibility. One of the things about a will is that a will can be used to distribute property in any manner that you choose. The law provides for a specific thing if you don't, a specific scheme if you don't have a will. I'll give you an example, and I use this example a lot. In Palm Beach County, in Florida, there was a lady who had 5 kids. She was a multimillionaire. She, for some reason, got very mad at her kids, and she disinherited all of them in her will and left everything to her poodle, to her dog. The children, after she passed away, all contested it. They sued the estate, saying she couldn't possibly have been in her right mind. Well, what happened is that the court found that she had executed her will properly and legally, following all the proper steps, and all of that money went to the dog, and then to the caretaker of the dog. The kids were completely out. And I just heard, I think last year, that the dog finally died last year, so now that caretaker is, very rich. But for the meantime, the dog was the richest dog probably in the country. So the point, though, is that you don't have to explain why you're doing what you're doing, but whatever you do, as long as you do it properly, the court has to follow it. So one of the things that often comes up is, well, you'll find template wills, and ISNA used to actually have a will which was 55 pages long, you remember that? I actually had them take it down from the ISNA website. And the reason was because I couldn't make sense of it. And by the way, you know, Dr. Manzoor Kahaf, who wrote the document, very, very close family friend of mine. I love him to death. And I saw his son here actually today in the convention center.
Not an attorney.
Yeah, he's not an attorney, he's a CPA. And he did a very, very good job, but it was so difficult to get through. As an attorney in estate planning, for me, I said, if I can't look at it, if I can't figure it out, then, you know, if I took it to another attorney to look and figure it out, they're going to have a hard time too. So the thing is, a lot of template wills out there that you find are either very much like that. I've seen about 4 or 5 different ones since then, all purporting to be Islamic template wills. And the problem is, every single one of them has been written by a non-lawyer or and somebody who does not have, usually, any kind of an understanding of state probate laws or will drafting laws and rules and things like that. So what happens is, while the people are very well intentioned and they have a very good idea, they don't necessarily know how to translate that into a legal document that would be effective. So what I do, like in the wills that I write for my clients, I don't include anything about Islam or Sharia and things like that. Why? Because I want to keep it simple. My wills are no more than 10 to 15 pages long, which is actually pretty long for a will. But that's only because I break up all the shares and like every different permutation. But the idea is that I want to make it simple, and I don't go into the reasons because I don't want to confuse a judge. Wills always have to be done through a judge in court. That's how they are effectuated. That's how the distributions are done. But if a judge is looking at this page that has all this beautiful language about your shahada and your testament of faith and instructions to your children and family of how not to weep loudly, which are great things, but the judge is going to be like, what is all this? And going to get it. This isn't a will, right? And by the time he gets to the will part of it, he's going to be disinterested and probably tear half of it apart as it is. So keep it simple. And one example I give about that is that there's another document. A will is a document it's a legal document that transfers property from the estate of a deceased person, or a person, right, to another person or other people. There's another document that does that. Anybody know what that is? Well, no, a contract is an agreement between people, right? Well, I guess this is sort of a contract too. A deed. If you sell your house, right, let's say it's even between one Muslim family to another Muslim family. At the top of the deed, you're not going to write Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu anna Muhammadar Rasul. In a deed, it's going to get filed with the clerk's office. So it just simply says buyer, seller, property, etc., right? So that's how I approach wills too. Is you want to keep it simple, you want to keep it bare bones and to the point, because as long as you do it properly, nobody can question the reason why. And with all this atmosphere of anti-Sharia this and that, it's better just to make it very simple. Anyway, that's what happens in court. If you want to stay out of court, the best thing to do really is a trust. So trusts can be really complicated to understand. I'm going to try and make it very simple, or try to is the operative word. A trust is basically an agreement. It's like a contract between the grantor, who is the person who's creating the trust, and a trustee. Sometimes it's the same person. Sometimes it's a relative, sometimes it's a trusted, whatever. Sometimes they're actually companies that act as trustees as well. To safeguard and manage a specific set of assets. And it could be cash, it could be property, it could be anything. And it's for the purpose of benefiting a specific set of beneficiaries that you list in your trust document. And usually under a set of certain conditions. So sometimes these conditions may be age, that at a certain age, the beneficiary will get 10% of whatever they're due, and at another age, they'll get 20%, etc., until they get their 100%. The trust itself becomes a separate legal entity. So it's kind of like creating a new person or a new corporation. The best analogy is really a corporation. So you're really creating a separate legal entity that will hold property. So one of the benefits of it is that property is no longer owned by you. And that means that during your lifetime, the trust can operate and distribute money or raise revenue, income, etc., without it necessarily directly influencing or affecting you. And I'll get to those issues a little bit more specifically in a minute. And that's where this last point comes in. There are several legal and tax-related safeguards which make trusts a useful tool. So now, Brother Safa mentioned something about a waqf, and I want to make this point. A trust, what we're actually talking about in estate planning is not the same thing as a traditional Islamic waqf. A traditional Islamic waqf, and by the way, can you show me the, actually it's right here. There's a really, really good chapter in this pamphlet that's outside about a waqf, the history of a waqf, the Sharia definition of a waqf, the conditions of a waqf, how they're managed, etc. It's very, very good. In fact, I was just correcting some of my stuff based on that right now. And Islamic waqf is really it's actually a very, very old construct dating back from the time of the Prophet ﷺ himself. And it is similar to a trust, except that a waqf is basically the holding of property by a third party for the safeguarding of it. And there are conditions such as it is typically not something that can go back to the person who put it in the waqf. It is usually for a specific purpose, and oftentimes it is perpetual. It's meant to continue on. There's typically no responsibility specifically to actually grow or develop the assets of the waqf, although that's usually what it's used for. So in a typical trust, the beneficiaries can actually sue the trustee under certain circumstances if the trust assets are not growing based on the investments that are in it. To say you're not doing a good enough job, you need to do this better. So the trust, though, is an actual legal vehicle for conveying property, and the trustee bears specific duties, specific responsibilities to the beneficiaries. So in a trust, the trust itself becomes the owner of the asset. In a waqf, the ownership isn't really clear because the person, I don't know what the trustee word is for in a waqf, but the person, the waqf itself is holding it for the owner in a manner of speaking. So in fact, you'll see a lot of times, especially if you do a lot of work with Islamic centers and masajid, that they give their titles to organizations like NATE and CITF and others for a waqf. As a waqf. So that's it's similar, but it's a little different than what we're talking about here. I'm going to go very quickly now. There's two types of trusts, a revocable trust and irrevocable trust. They all have their pros and cons. There's different types of trusts within that, charitable trusts, special needs trusts, gun trusts, and special needs trusts, since Salman mentioned also, they're a type of trust meant to provide for people who have special needs, either physical, mental, emotional, etc., where you want to set up something where they might not be able to have their own income, but you want to make sure something is there to provide for them. And sometimes, depending on the circumstances, there may be Medicare-related issues too. So they have to be very careful with those types of things. Revocable trust, very simply, is, just like the name implies, it's a trust that the person who created it can revoke. That's why it's called revocable, right? So, because of that ability, you can modify it, you can revoke it, you can also be the trustee of it, you can be the beneficiary, you can do all three things at the same time. But because of that, there are some tax issues that apply to it. And it's often used for managing one's own assets. Now, the tax issues here is that anything that comes in, any income that the trust generates, passes through to the grantor's personal income taxes. There's a form that the trust has to issue to be attached with your 1040 that says this is how much income was in the trust, and it has to be reported as income by the grantor. Liability and judgments issue also. There's a type of trust I'll get to, the irrevocable in a second, which protects people from judgments completely, that nobody can reach into and break into that little lockbox. A revocable trust is not like that. A revocable trust can be reached through certain types of judgments. And once the grantor dies, it becomes irrevocable because the person who created it was the one who could modify it. If he's gone, he or she's gone, now nobody can modify it, so it's not irrevocable. So an irrevocable trust is one that cannot be changed. The person who created it cannot be the trustee or the beneficiary, and they have no right to modify it. The idea is you take something and you put it away, and you can't touch it ever again, basically. Now, a lot of times the trustee is a spouse or a sibling or a child or something, so there might be ways of making sure that it continues following the intent of the grantor, but the idea behind it was to make it a completely separate thing. And because of that, it acts kind of like a lockbox, and that gives the tax protections. Taxes are done independently of the grantor. The trust has to file its own tax returns, and it has to pay its own taxes. Judgment and liability is basically one of those, the lockbox idea is really the best thing, because whatever's in the trust cannot be reached by somebody who sues the owner or the grantor of that trust. Now, if, let's say, you have rental property that you've put into the trust, and somebody sues, like a tenant sues, they would be limited to what is, in terms of assets that they could reach in a judgment, to what's inside that trust. So it's a real asset protection tool. So the price of giving up all control and access is this total protection from taxes and judgments. Really quickly, in trusts and wills, they work very closely together. You can have a will that pours everything into a trust. Sometimes we do marital trusts because there is a tax exemption for spouses, an unlimited tax exemption for spouses. So if you give something to your spouse, it could be $100 million worth, tax-free to the spouse. So we use that as a trust because once it goes into the trust, tax-free to the marital trust. After the spouse passes away, it's still in the trust. It's not owned by the estate, so it doesn't get any additional taxes. So there's these little things, these little tricks that have been developed. These are often irrevocable trusts are used really for asset protection for people who are in high-risk industries like physicians and things. And there are a few other uses, like, for example, charitable trusts and that type of thing. We had talked about special needs. Now, sometimes people use trusts instead of a will, and that is because it allows you to go outside of the courts, and you can do things a lot faster. Wills oftentimes are not filed or done anything with by a judge for 2 or 3 years after the person dies, or even longer. So there's pros and cons to everything in this. And so in summary, trusts can be a useful tool to protect assets, to provide a constant income distribution scheme for the beneficiaries, and revocable and irrevocable trusts have their own pros and cons. So make sure, but it can be really, really complicated. It's really good for people who have businesses or multiple large assets and have a lot of high risk. And so with that, inshallah, I'll end. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum. This is my contact information.
Thank you, Asad. Yes, his contact information is up there. I'm hoping and expecting, because really this is a teaser. I mean, if you came here to be educated about wills and trusts, that it's not the forum. This is to pique your interest. If you already have an interest, it will point you in a certain direction, and then you come up to the experts, talk to them, get their information, perhaps have an extended conversation regarding that later on. So I mentioned earlier that all 3 attorneys, and I was totally mistaken, I think, in that Fatima is a certified financial planner with Azad Asset Management. She helps American Muslim families and organizations achieve their financial goals without compromising their Islamic values. She is a graduate of Cornell University and the Rochester Institute of Technology, and is specialized in Islamic financial planning. So we give her additional applause for being among 3 attorneys and holding her own.
You can't get it down.
Okay, so assalamu alaikum everyone. Again, we have so much that we could cover in planned charitable giving, so I'm going to have to be brief and just hopefully go through a few points. At least some thoughts that you can take away with you. When we talk about financial planning, we've covered the estate planning part, your will, creating your legacy. There's also the halal investments. There are also risk management. One part that often we fail to look at and focus on is charitable giving. And I want to talk a little bit about that so we can learn how to be more effective givers. So I also want to talk a little bit about the Islamic roots of charitable giving. Now, this was a concept Brother Asad mentioned, that the waqf is really a part of our history. This is not something that we've learned from Harvard. This is that they have an endowment. This is something that is a part of our history. And I think it's really important that we learn about it so we can learn to revive the waqf, the charitable waqf, and this concept of giving. So this is a famous hadith that I'm sure most of you are aware of, that when a human being dies, his work comes to an end except for 3 things. ongoing charity, knowledge imparted and benefited from, or a pious child who prays for him. And in many cases, this ongoing charity is defined as sadaqah jariyah through a waqf. Now, this is just a basic definition of what a waqf is. We often hear this term, we relate it to endowment, we relate it to trust, but really a waqf is, in Arabic, literally means detainment or prevention. And it means the retention of the possessed from the possession of the others. Now, as I mentioned, the waqf is really something that has been a part of our history from the beginning of Islam. So, actually, whenever Hazrat Umar acquired one of the most valuable properties in Khaybar, he went to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and he said, "What should I do with this? It's the most valuable property I've acquired." And the response was that he should give it as a waqf, and the fruit that comes from it should be given to the people. And that way, the growth, the fruits that came from that property continued to benefit people and benefit society. And in another example, whenever the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ went to Medina, and when they went there, they found that there was one well, and the Muslims needed water. And so this was a challenge, and I think this is a challenge many of us face in our organizations. We need water, we need sustenance in our organizations. And at that time, Uthman bin Affan, he actually went and bought that well, and he gave it for the people, and he bought it from his own money. And so the point is that, alhamdulillah, our community is gaining wealth, and we're gaining resources, and we need to figure out a way how we can make sure those resources continue to benefit our organizations and our society. So this is just a simple diagram of how the waqf works. And Brother Asad kind of mentioned a little bit of it, and I think in the brochures outside you can read more about it. But the idea is that the fruit or the income that comes from the principal or the property is used for the benefit of others. So the benefits of planned charitable giving. Now, most of us are familiar, charitable giving means I take $1 out and I give it to a charity. And alhamdulillah, that is very important. But our community is growing, and the need goes now beyond just going to giving one-time donations and going to fundraisers. We understand how important fundraisers are, but we also recognize how difficult they are, how much time they take to organize. And I'm not sure about you, but sometimes whenever we get another invitation for a fundraiser, we say, how long can this continue? We have to find a sustainable way to support our organizations. So planned charitable giving is really about figuring out how you can help in your charitable giving through smarter and more effective ways. Planned charitable giving includes your tax benefits. So the IRS, the government here, they say, look, you can either give us your tax money, and we'll take that and go put it to a social use. We'll go develop programs, benefit community. But if you take control of your charitable dollars, we'll give you a deduction. You don't have to pay taxes on that money. So we have to realize that we need to take control of our charitable money and take back control of our tax dollars. Otherwise, the government, alhamdulillah, they have good programs out there, but we have very smart people who can also do very good things with that money. So tax benefits means how can my donation help me and my cause? So if I'm making a donation, is there another way I can do it in a better way that will give me maybe a better tax deduction, which will mean that I will be able to give more? That's a question that we need to start thinking about. Another thing, strategic giving. So how can we plan donations to provide a cash flow stream? How can we create trusts, or how can we create institutions? How can we create projects that will continue to give beyond the one-time donation? Impact donations. How can we commit to a particular project or cause? We see there's so much need. And not all of us, have the wealth to go and make, maybe we feel that we can make big changes, but you can choose an impact, and you can choose a charity and have an impact. So choose a cause. Find something that you really feel passionate about, learn about it, go and talk to the organization, say, look, I can commit $100 a month. What can you do with that money? And we can start having an impact. And then family involvement. Charitable giving, planned charitable giving is about a plan. And often that includes having a family plan. Our legacy includes our children, and our legacy also includes what we teach them about how to give to charity. So rather than these kind of ad hoc donations maybe that we're used to making, let's have a plan as a family. How are we going to donate? How are we going to support the causes that are important to us? And how are we going to build those desires to give in our children? So planned charitable giving, is something that can incorporate that. I know there's not much time. I'm going to just quickly talk about some techniques that people use for planned charitable giving. They may or may not apply to your situation, but just to give you an idea of what are the other things that are out there that can be used. One way is, rather than maybe giving a one-time donation, if you have some appreciated stocks, you bought a stock at a low price, now the price has gone up, and you made some money sitting there. How can that appreciated stock actually help make a better donation than you pulling money out of your pocket? If you donate that stock, for example, if you bought shares of a company for $100, and now more than a year has passed, that share has grown to $150. Now, if you sell those shares after 1 year, you're going to have to pay some capital gains taxes. The IRS is going to say, look, you made money on this gain, so you're going to pay capital gains taxes. And at 15%, for a $50 gain, you would pay about $7.50. So that's money that's decreasing from your gain. Instead, if you decide, you know what, I have this money, I put in $100, but instead I'm going to donate it to my favorite charity. I'm going to donate it to ISNA, let's say. Then when you donate those shares after 1 year, you'll take a tax deduction of $150 and you'll pay 0 in taxes. So essentially, you were able to give $150 when you only put in $100. So it's a smart technique that some of you might be able to use if you have some appreciated stocks in your portfolio. Another tool that you can use is called a donor-advised fund. And a donor-advised fund, I call it a waqf-like structure. It's not a true waqf in that it's not set up like a trust. But it's a way that you can take some money that you have it invested, and that money can be used to pay charitable donations in the future. So, for example, if you have a certain amount of money now, you want to put it in the donor-advised fund. Later on, you'll have the ability to make pledges or make contributions from that fund as it grows to the charitable causes that are important to you. Also, you can set up your own charitable waqf. Now, as Muslims, we actually can actually set up a true waqf. And we can use the different stipulations and we can use the different provisions to make it a genuine waqf, just like the one that the Sahabas used to do, in the time of the Prophet ﷺ. And so we can set up family foundations, and alhamdulillah, families that have the means to do this, this is a great opportunity to leave a legacy, to really make sure that your dollars are used for the things that your family is passionate about, that money is not squandered by maybe a change in a board or change in environment. That money is really used in the long term to sustainably help and support the causes that are important to you. Charitable trusts. These are two examples, charitable remainder trusts and charitable lead trusts. These are actually trusts which can help you and your family and a nonprofit or a charitable cause. So in the example of a charitable remainder trust, you can use this, for example, if you want to make sure that the income from the trust during your lifetime benefits you, and at the end of your life, or maybe your life and your spouse's life, it benefits charity. That's a great tool to help both yourself and also to help charity. The other type is a charitable lead trust, where when this type of trust, you help charity during lifetime. Maybe you say, I have enough money right now, I don't need this money, I might probably need it later when I retire or when my kids go to school. But right now, I can create this trust and the income can go to charity, maybe for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. And at the end of that term, I want the money to come back and help me and my family. That's great. You're getting a tax deduction for it, you're helping yourself, and you're helping a charitable cause. And this is, I'm going to skip this just in the interest of time, but this is an example of a charitable lead trust if you created one for $100,000 for 10 years. Basically, when you set it up, and these are hypothetical numbers that can change based on your situation, but you could, if in this example, somebody that sets up a 10-year trust for $100,000 would receive an initial upfront, around $40,000 tax deduction. If the trust grows for 10 years and 5% is paid out to charity, over that time almost $60,000 would go to charity. And at the end of the trust, whenever it comes back to you, if there was at least a 7.5% rate of return, you would get back about $122,000. So it's a way for a trust to grow, and as that trust grows, it helps both you and your community. So thank you very much, and if there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Jazakumullah khair. Sister Fatima, we have about 5 minutes left. I know that that's very short time for questions answered, but we will open it up. My only ask of you is that only those questions that are general in nature that can benefit you and others, ask them openly in the next 5 minutes. If there's a question that's more specific to your situation, obviously come out and ask the professionals. So let's take a couple of questions and then we'll close the session. I thank our speakers for their wonderful expertise and advice. Go ahead.
I have many meetings with lawyers about giving a trust or a will, and I was like so surprised that I don't have nothing in it, but I do have access to protect and give who I want. But why are the trust fees so expensive? If it's a simple, like you said, you make it simple, then why is it so expensive for people to afford instead of going the time?
Yeah. Yes, and I wanted, so repeat the question for people and then you can, absolutely.
The question is that, that for trusts, especially when you're doing a trust versus a will, wills cost a lot less and trusts cost a lot more. I'll give you an example, a very simple example of a typical will versus a typical trust that I might write. My typical will, I said, is usually about 10, maybe 15 pages. My very basic trust is no less than 25 pages. And my most comprehensive one has hit about 50 pages. So trusts have a lot more language because wills they have the legal framework around them in terms of how they have to operate and how the courts use them. Trusts operate independent of the courts. So they have to have their own legal framework within them so that the person who's running, the trustee who's running the trust, knows what the limits are, what the requirements are, what the rights of the beneficiaries are. So there's a lot of legal mumbo-jumbo that goes in there. No offense to mumbo-jumbo, But
one other way to look at it, though, is that trusts, for exactly what Asad said, are more expensive at the outset, but you have to look at the probate cost, the back end of a will, which does add up. You have to get a probate attorney at that point again. You have to have probate fees, court fees, and time. So, there's instances where the trust will actually be cheaper in the long run because you're not probating it. Like a will has to go to probate court. The trust does not have to be probated. Yeah, and as an example of that too, one of my first cases, I did a probate case in Long Island for actually a former MSA founder. And it turned out in the end, my fees that were paid out were nearly $10,000 because of the 3-year-long process. That's how much work went into it. And if he'd done a will, it would have cost him, anywhere between a few $100s to maybe a couple $1,000s at the top end of it. And it would have been a lot simpler. It saved a lot of time and a lot of money in the... For a will. If he'd done a will, the probate process would have been small. And so, but still, instead of $10,000, it would have been $5,000. But compare that to how much the trust costs. The trust cost isn't nearly that much. And so it's a lot simpler.
We have a lot of accountants and lawyers in our organization. And what the sister talked about as far as the charitable donations. A lot of our organizations, Asad's are ready to do that. Does this not have a resource you can go to kind of execute that part of it? If you're ready to do that? Do we have a resource? Do we have a contact person to set up those charitable donations? For example, it's not part of it.
No, so if you look at this, the handout that we're giving you, the ISNA Development Foundation will help. The contact information is in there. I believe right now it's going to be Sister Aisha Kishli, who's the assistant for Brother Ahmed Al-Hattab. So the ISNA Development Foundation would be the place. They'll get you informed and they'll help with the process of doing it, especially if ISNA is going to be one of the beneficiaries.
Exactly. And these are all sitting on the table right outside the door too. So there's a whole stack.
So does that answer? Yeah, and usually sometimes I know we've given our contact information, but you can always follow up with ISNA, and they always kind of filter it to the right person involved to help you out further too. Okay.
My question just was, from my understanding, we can set up charitable trusts that will donate to whatever organization we wish. We get tax benefits, and at the end, we can still collect the family back?
Yeah, so that's an example of a charitable deed trust. The question was, can you set up a trust that benefits charity during your lifetime, and at the end you collect basically back what you put into the trust. So yes, that's a technique called a charitable lead trust. And with a charitable lead trust, you can stipulate, you name your charitable beneficiary, the person who's going, or the entity that's going to receive the charitable donation every year. The IRS has limitations and their guidelines there in terms of you have to have a minimum amount going to charity every year. And also the donation is based on the present value of those future donations. So there's some calculations that go in there to see. But if you have a significant amount of money right now and you say, I don't need this money, and this is a really good tool, alhamdulillah, for those who are younger, I would say, and again, don't need the money to be able to set up. And later at the end, the money comes back to you, so at the end of the term, whatever's remaining in the trust comes back to you to benefit your family. So it's a great technique, and it can really help you attain your own financial goals, but at the same time, you're fulfilling your charitable goals.
And remember also that a lot of these things can be combined. So, for example, the family foundation that Fatima was talking about, that can sometimes, under the right circumstances, can own its own trusts, for example. So you can use different vehicles sometimes together.
For this, one has to go to the Muslim trust, or any non-Muslim trust can take care of this?
Well, my suggestion is always to go to a Muslim lawyer, because presumably the Muslim lawyer... Oh, sorry, the question was, should we always go to a Muslim lawyer for these types of things? I'll be honest, there are a lot of Muslim lawyers who don't know a thing about Islamic estate planning. There are some non-Muslim lawyers who do. Not very many, but there are some. What I always recommend is find somebody who is a Muslim lawyer who does know about Islamic estate planning. There's a growing number of them. In fact, there's a group... You have a list too. Yeah, ISNA has a list. There's also a growing group of people who are obtaining their ijaza in Islamic estate planning. I'm actually part of that group, but there's some who've actually attained it already through one of the contemporaries of Sheikh Hamza Yusuf. So, student of Abdullah bin Bay, actually, is the Sheikh Abdullah al-Qadi is the name of the Sheikh. So this is something that people are actually focusing in on now, and so there are more. But I would definitely look for something like that.
And one other way to do it is also, some people really like to go local, right? Like you want to meet with the attorney, you want to tell him, and you want to do it. You can also, so very often, you probably get this too, I get this a lot, a normal attorney will reach out to us to bless it, or say, my clients want to make an Islamic will, I know how to make a will, can you help me with that? So but then it would behoove you to give the contact of that person. Like, I want you to draft it locally, but could you consult this attorney in doing so? It may cost you a little bit more, but as we're trying to say, that sometimes there's a cost to being Sharia compliant and right, and it's well worth it. So that would be the one way to handle it, inshallah. I forgot to ask this before when I used to ask this. How many people in the audience already have a will? Or a trust? Some sort of estate planning. That is not so bad. That's about half. So that's not bad, but if you take away something, at least at the very rudimentary level, at least a simple will is something that I would make a very niyat to do, leaving this room, inshallah.
I have a question here, a question there, then I have to close. So go ahead, brother.
Two-part question. One, if you formed a family trust, it's been a few years, is there value in revisiting that or re-looking at it? And second, the estate tax limits that have changed so much in this country. How does that impact trust planning or estate planning?
That's a very good question. So the question was, if I've done my estate planning maybe 3, 4, 5 or longer years ago, do I need to revisit it? And the second part was, now with changes in the estate taxes, for any of those who are not familiar, the estate tax is like a death tax, which you are paid when you have to pay the IRS when you have above a certain amount of money. And right now that's about 5.35 million, a little over than that. And how does that affect our estate plans? For estate planning, of course, you need to make sure you revise it, because there could be changes in your family's circumstances, in your family situation. I would say it's always a good idea to make sure you know your estate plan. There's so many clients of ours that come in and they've done their estate plan maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago, but they have no clue what was in it. So it's very important to know what your estate plan is. And to review it and know it yourself. And then if you feel that there have been changes, and it's been a significant amount of time, I would say yes, it's a good idea to go ahead and advise it, because not only do federal laws change, your state local laws also change. So you want to make sure that you're taking the most benefit. With regards to estate taxes, now that's not necessarily something that applies to a lot of families, since you don't have to pay estate taxes when your size of your estate or the wealth that you own is less than 5 million. However, there are still important implications with planning. So I would say, even though you are below the $5 million mark, the other issues of the serious consequences of not having a will or not having a trust in place are still very, very important. And even if you're not doing it for estate tax purposes, remember, like Brother Salman said, if you don't create a way, if you don't create your will, you're going to have to follow the will of your state. And they may say half goes to your spouse. They may say all of it goes to your spouse. But your obligation is to make sure that your heirs inherit. And if you do not allow that, or that does not happen, then you've not fulfilled your obligation.
This question for any of the three panelists. One of the things I understand is U.S. tax law, Sharia compliant planning, is not exactly the same for larger estate, something like 10 million plus. That's question number one. Is just a follow-up question of the lady that she asked. Let's say you go to an attorney who drafts your trust, which is not exactly what you intended or somebody who drafted intended. You don't find out until it's too late. Who's liable for that?
Well, the liability issue is a little complicated because the person who owns the trust, who's the grantor of the trust, ownership isn't exactly the right word for it, but who went to the lawyer, ultimately it falls upon them to make sure that they've read through everything and they understand something, and if they don't, then they need to ask the lawyer. By the way, everyone heard the question, right? The brothers in the back of the room, so if I could hear, I figured everybody else. So the thing is, it also depends on the kind of trust, because if it's an irrevocable trust, that's a very, very big deal because you can't change it. If it's a revocable trust, you can still change it. For an estate of over 10 million, I would think it would most probably be something that akin to an irrevocable trust. But if it's something that the grantor didn't necessarily realize that the trust wasn't exactly as they wanted, then I'm sure there are malpractice issues that somebody could raise against the lawyer, but you'd have to be it would have to be really starkly different. I mean, if it's close, it might simply be that way because there wasn't a way to do it otherwise. But generally, the ultimate responsibility of making sure that the grantor understands the language of the trust is in the hands of the grantor. So we do our best to explain it. I know, so I certainly do. Yeah.
The other part of the question was, what if somebody has an estate, more than the estate tax exemption, more than 10 million? What can you do? So people often feel that, well, the Islamic inheritance is very defined. I have to give this much to my spouse, this much to each child. It's very restrictive, and if I follow that, I may be paying more estate taxes if I'm above the $10 million mark. Interestingly, we had this problem at Azad because some of our clients do fall into that. A lot of our clients fall into that. And so we actually said, look, this is a real problem. Why? Because of wanting to make sure that we're Sharia compliant, we're going to be hit with this big tax bill. It's just, oh, well, it's the price I have to pay for Sharia. So as we started researching this, we found actually this concept of waqf al-ahli, which is a concept in our Islamic tradition. Of creating a family trust, of creating a waqf for your family. And so these are, just to give you an idea, there are solutions out there. So I would say, just because you feel that you have conviction, you want to follow the Islamic guidelines, don't feel that that's a constraint. Because you may have to work harder to achieve the same result as your non-Muslim neighbor, but you can achieve the same end results for your family.
I am going to take your question, even though I said it's the last, so go ahead.
And could you shed some light on pros and cons of the templates that are available that
That's really easy. There's no pros or all cons. No. It's like, you can't go there. Yeah, I mean, we heavily don't recommend it. As I told you, we actually, we fought hard to get ours taken. Oh, the question was, the brother asked, what are the pros and cons of using a template will that you may find anywhere from Office Max to Walgreens? I actually saw them at Walgreens the other day. So one major con, obviously it's not going to be Sharia compliant. So if your goal is to have a Sharia compliant will, that's not going to be achieved by these template wills that you find at a retail market. ISNA no longer has a template on our site or available, nor do we distribute it. You could probably find it somewhere on the internet though, because it's readily available everywhere. But we went through it. We found that in some instances it causes more confusion. You may think that you're okay and you're actually vulnerable. So that's why we're recommending not to do it. And executing the will, yeah, because it's like the states have different requirements, right? That's a template that's made for everybody, and it says, oh, but still check with your state because some states have different witness requirements, number of witnesses. There's notary, attestations. There's a lot of different things that go into it. But the only pro I can say is that the judge will look at it. So it is better than having absolutely nothing, right? But for Islamically speaking, if we're trying to do a Sharia compliant will, we're trying to do the wasiyyah, it's definitely not going to have the distribution schedule that we want. So in that way, it is a pretty good big con with other cons, but it's better than having absolutely nothing. So if I was to follow up on my hand answer thing, and you said somebody has nothing and they got that, they would be slightly better than having the no hand. Thank you. Inshallah.
We do have to close, and so let's again. I would like to close with hadith that really, as I advance in age, it becomes more prominent in my mind. Although I heard it and learned it when I was very young, the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam: إذا مات أحدكم انقطع عمله إلا من ثلاث صدقة جارية علم ينتفع به أو ولد صالح يدعو له. The Prophet ﷺ says that once a human being passes away, once a person dies, then all of their deeds are discontinued except for three. The first one is sadaqatun jariyah, as an ongoing charity. And the second is a child who is going to pray for them. And the third, knowledge that they have parted and people are benefiting from. And I would say sadaqatun jariyah, there's nothing better than a waqf or a trust or those kind of charitable plannings that we just talked about. And even to get an extra dua from your child, it wouldn't hurt for you to leave them a good, comfortable, sum that they can use, and hopefully some of your charitable giving would be to support places of learning that are benefiting people. So I hope and pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give us the wisdom and the will and the ability to follow those timeless and sacred instructions that we have been given by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Prophet. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that make us among those who work hard and are given tawfiq by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala so they can leave something behind, whether it's for their children or somebody else.
Well, you got to Mirza. I know if some people came here because Dr. Mirza is on the program. Yeah, he's on the program, I believe.
Yes, Dr. Yaqub Mirza was on the program, but I think he had another engagement.
Yeah.
That's why.
A sponsored event for people.
Yes, exactly.
So he wanted to apologize that he could not hear somebody came to see him.
Absolutely, we apologize on his behalf to you. Jazakumullah khair for attending. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
It did.